so-called flying saucers.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the SA. It's rotating.
Welcome to Kill the Stigma. Today we're going to be covering a few topics, but I want to focus on forbidden history. I want to focus on the past that we're not supposed to know and see if there's any smoke there, because I think there is. You know, we know about the Majestic 12 documents, but there's who took over after those 12 members passed away, and who's in control now of the situation. So that's what I want to talk about. There is another thing that's important, but I'll just mention my comments briefly. I'm not going to get into it. I've covered it a lot. It's the New Jersey drones. They gave us the worst BS. I mean, they said it was FAA approved for research, and then the hobbyists got out of control. What? That's now, that's exactly what I expected. With this topic of UFOs, it seems like we're getting close. We're getting close to something. Disclosure is here, dude. Bro, we're getting this Trump. We're getting disclosure, man. But I don't expect it to happen for two reasons. Seems like it's always losing in the football with this game. We seem to be getting close. Something happens. And I don't know. It just you know what I mean? Something always happens. And I think the people that are in charge of this are 10 steps ahead of us, as George Knapp always says. The people that have the goodies, and the closer we get to the goodies, the more the pushback. And he says these guys are better at their jobs than we are at doing ours. I agree with that, unfortunately. But truth will prevail. I just don't know when. But truth always prevails. So that's all I'm going to say about that. Okay, where was I going? Let's talk about MJ-12. But second generation. All right, let's do this.
This enormous cover-up was initiated on September 24th, 1947 by President Truman by an executive order which established a group of 12 top military, scientific, and intelligence personnel of their time. They were known as the MJ-12. Although the group exists today, none of the original members is still alive. The last one to die was a guy named Gordon Gray, died in 1984. As each member passed away, another member was appointed to fill the position. The group today is composed of more members of the original 12 than the original 12, and among those who are thought to be current members are Dr. Kissinger, Dr. Ed Teller, General Lou Allen, and Admiral Bobby Inman. On November 18th, 1952, President-elect Dwight David Eisenhower was briefed on Majestic 12 and the cover-up by Admiral Roscoe H. Hillenkotter. Admiral Hillenkotter was MJ-1 and had been director of the Central Intelligence Agency from May of 1947 until September of 1950.
So, 1947, September 24, 1947, the National Security Act gets passed. Now, this is a very important moment in American history because that's when we gave the power to the military-industrial complex and to unelected bureaucrats, the deep state. In fact, Harry S. Truman was very much against this. He regretted that. He did a paper on that. And yeah, it's one of those things that it's definitely connected to UFOs, but not just UFOs. It's a lot of it has to do with the Cold War and Russia, the Soviet Union. And once we did that, and when that got signed, which I do think is very interesting, that it's September 24th, 1947, that's when that got passed, because Truman was against this. He did not want to do this. He did not. He's like, listen, you guys were great during World War II, but we're not at war. But then things started getting heated up with Russia, which is true, the Cold War. But you got Roswell, you got all this UFOs like in the background crashing. It's suspicious. It's very suspicious, and I do think that's a huge part of why this National Security Act got passed. And then you know what happened afterwards? We went to town. The CIA went freaking nuts, and the secrecy. You know, everything that goes against the Constitution of the United States, basically. Yeah, I'm not going to say anything else on that. But why don't we talk about one thing that he said there that I have a bone to pick a lot. It bothers me a lot because the founder of NICAP, which I think Leslie King did a great job on her Disney documentary, but I don't hear anybody say about these people from the CIA involved in NICAP. For Roscoe Hillenkotter, which was also part of MJ-12, whatever you think of it, first director of the CIA, was part of NICAP, and there's others. In fact, I'm gonna ask ChatGPT members that were connected to the agency, and why doesn't anybody bring this up in documentaries? I think I saw Donald Mansell on the Disney documentary, but I didn't hear anything about the Donald Mansell gap. Why? It's a fact. You can look it up even in Wikipedia, that this guy, the first thing he did was destroy astronomical plates. I think that stuff is important because if you have the first debunker, the elite debunker, like destroying data and being super shady, it's interesting that he left us the 1952 sighting, because how can he not know that? Who knows? Maybe it was a little puzzle piece, or maybe it was just incompetence. But that should be added to this history. And I want to know why these people that were part of, working for the CIA were so interested in UFOs. Because if UFOs is nothing, then why? Okay, sorry, that's all I got. But then, why don't we talk about Edward Teller, Bobby Ray Inman, Dr. Kissinger, and he said another name, and I can't remember it. I know a little bit about the others. And John Lear said this in 1988. This is before Bob Lazar. This is before, before Bob Lazar. And we know who hired Bob Lazar. Say what you want. Edward Teller, father of the hydrogen bomb, the DOE, Department of Energy. So, that checked, right? Kissinger, I haven't been able to find much information about Kissinger and UFOs, but I did. Everybody mentions him. Like, yes, he knew. And I'm sure he did. And then not him, the other person, Bobby Ray Inman. Bobby! You've been a bad boy. All right, look, guys, let's show you what I got, and then we'll talk about this, okay? But wouldn't you guys agree that this information should be included in documentaries? Like, I don't know anything about NICAP. I don't know anything. That's like old, and I didn't know. But look at these names. I'm gonna ask ChatGPT to give me a name, to give me some names. I'll add it here, and you guys tell me what you think. All right. So Joseph Bryan 3, look, did you guys see that? Psychological warfare, and connected to the CIA. Roscoe Hillenkotter, we already know about him. And then it said a few other people, but it's like, oh, and don't forget who helped found the NICAP. Thomas Thompson Brown. Anti-gravity, potential time traveler, some say. Who knows? So I think this is important, and I want to get to the bottom of it. And if somebody knows anything, please reach out, because I want to know what the hell is up with these people forming NICAP. Like, was it some counterintelligence? Because we know Roscoe Hillenkotter was like apparently pro-disclosure, but then one day Donald Kehoe wanted to have hearings, and he's just like, I'm out. Why? What happened? Why does it every time we get close to something, somebody gets spooked? James Forrestal, the rumors are that he was seeing people, strange people following him, and he got paranoid, and then he jumped out of a freaking window. What really happened there, guys? Who is scaring people? Imagine that Donald Trump actually wanted to get to the bottom of it. All right, Stacy, whatever her name is, and like, I don't know what's so terrifying. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's just the fact that people are not ready to handle it. People don't want to know. People want to live their daily lives. People would rather be a little child and not know the facts. It might be psychologically intimidating for most people. And you know what? This topic gets strange and weird. And, and that's kind of what I would like to do. I would like to know how we get from talking about normal UFOs to like the high strangeness part, because it's there. And you think about it, an advanced civilization, you really think they're gonna be rational and follow our rules? Can I ask you a question? If you are a scientist and you're studying animals, do you think it's science fiction for them, what we do? If they can think in those terms, but it would look like science fiction. So why don't we just humble ourselves and freaking learn? Anyway, that's enough of my rant. I think it's important.
Work too, right? How all of the things that he's looking at connects to all of the things that they're looking at these meetings in 1985, and sort of how those kind of create this weird tapestry of solid connections, right? And they seem speculative, but then you come decades later and we're getting these revelations, and the revelations are, oh yeah, the ufologists happen to be right. You know,
Well, wasn't it in the ATP document or memo they had mentioned Bobby Ray Inman?
Yes, that's right. Yeah,
and Exler was all over that.
Yeah, that was the big connection. Is that, they said that they wanted to look at, getting involved with a major engineering program under Bobby Ray Inman.
Yeah.
And, this is something that, got people pretty interested. Of course, Colonel Alexander says it didn't happen. They weren't talking about that. Oak Shannon has insisted that it did happen, right? He wasn't going to go into any detail about why they were discussing it or anything, but he did say, no, that did happen. And I remember he said, I don't care what anybody says, it happened. It was, kind of a little back and forth there. But he was a big topic of discussion. And it turns out that Bob Exler, actually after the meeting, right, as in 1989, had a discussion with Bobby Ray Inman, called him up, right, and sort of talked to him about, can I help? Like what are these craft going to be made available for research? And, in no uncertain terms, kind of discussed, UFOs, and Bobby Ray Inman sort of entertains this, this discussion. And I think at first, maybe at the first time he calls, at the very beginning, he doesn't know it's about UFOs, but I think towards the end of the conversation, he does. And he essentially, instead of cutting him off, he says, hey, you should go talk to this guy and this guy. And the people that he's sending him to are not people that are, like random, like outside ufologists. He's sending them to, hey, go talk to the person who just retired as the director of naval intelligence. And go talk to this person who's just about to retire from deputy director of CIA, right? Go talk to him. And that person in particular, Heinemann, this is somebody who is in a role, and that we come to find out later did have some exposure to UFOs, right? And actually, um, he told Bob Exler that he didn't. One of our colleagues, he goes on by RGH on Twitter, he followed up with this guy and said, "Hey, there's the referencing back to Bobby Ray Inman, what he had said all those years earlier." This guy says, "Well, I'll give it a shot. It's been a long time since I've been involved in that work, right? But I'll give it a shot."
Right.
And, sort of not giving any details, but admitting that, yes, he was involved in that work and he's now going to try and answer these questions. Um, and it's interesting because that's the exact same position, right, as the person who we find out, blocked things up years later when OSAP was trying to get a technology transfer done, right, between Lockheed and Bigelow Aerospace, where they're trying to get that material from them. It was the deputy director of science and technology. That's the person who blocked it, right? Like that's the person who pulled the rug out. But it does seem like he was sort of in a position where he knew some things, but he's not the day-to-day guy. But he knows of the existence of it. And that's definitely seems to be the way Heinemann was too. And so I think it suggests that there's a legacy there that the deputy director of science and technology, and perhaps his, the people directly below him, we found documents that connected the assistant deputy director of science and technology, the person who'd be right under the deputy director of science and technology, to UFO stuff in particular. There was something that, was brought, a piece of material or something that was carried to the ADDS&T, right? The assistant deputy director of science and technology. So there are a lot of historical threads again there that they connect back to loose threads, but it's sort of like you have to have that deep context. And what's funny is I think a lot of people, when they think about ufology, they don't think about that. They think that that it's just a bunch of speculation.
That is Daniel Elizondo, no relation to Luis Elizondo, but this guy is super smart, does great work. He kind of he's not too loud. You don't see much of him, but guys, you have to read Loose Threads. In fact, he did that for free. I almost felt weird. Like you deserve money, bro. Like what's the? Sorry, guys. Professional. I hate it when people do good work and then they're like, "You're making money. You're a grifter." People that do good work should make money. Now the problem is when you take it to a whole other level to charge I don't know many thousands of dollars for whatever to have an experience and saying, "I know the answers. I'm the one with the answers." Look, I don't want to go on a tangent. But let's just take Dr. Greer, for example. He was right on a lot of things, but he's wrong in some, right? And you just can't tell me that all of these things are benevolent. You can't, and I think that's irresponsible. And anyway, let's not make this about him, but he was right in a lot of things. And CE5, I believe it's legit, but yeah, that's a whole other thing. So I do think people that do good work should get paid because that's just the way everything else goes. When it comes to, what it seems like to me? It's almost like it was designed that way. So people never got into this. It's literally hey, Anyway, let's talk about Bobby Ray Inman, okay? Let's continue to talk about Bobby Ray Inman, but please, Loose Threads, check it out. Daniel Elizondo, super smart guy. He's really good into the history, and actually, he's been spot on, and you can see the Loose Threads. It's fascinating. Anyway, let's continue with Bobby Ray Inman.
Over Phoenix, along the border, all the rest. Phenomena we did not understand, and the observations did not automatically tell you what the answer could be. So there are clear things here to try to understand and explore, and particularly if we're being subjected to surveillance within this planet, for what purpose in the process. But for my JPL I remain highly confident that there are no other elements within our galaxy that could be providing those. And I'm very skeptical of interstellar unless it's something out there that's far advanced beyond where the U.S. is technology. I think if it existed, we would have seen other evidence of it by this time. The James Webb will let us know a lot more about this over the next 2 or 3 years.
Well, maybe you can just help me clarify something, because when I was doing some background research on you, I came across a fascinating little segment from a documentary. It was a segment of an interview that you had in 1989 with a man called Bob Exler. Do you remember speaking to a man called Bob Exler?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, and during this conversation, he asked you whether you believed that the recovered vehicles would ever be made available for technical research outside of the military circles. And your response to this was, 10 years ago I would have said no, but whether time has evolved and they're beginning to become more open on it, it's a possibility. So obviously, correct me if I'm wrong, but it just seems like you're suggesting here that you're aware of retrieved UFOs being studied by the military.
No, the answer was no. I would not. We're not. Absolutely, we're no retrieved UFOs. I have high confidence.
A close confidant of George Bush and a man well acquainted with Area 51 was Admiral Bob Inman. His credentials are impeccable. He was director of both Naval Intelligence and the National Security Agency, as well as deputy director of the Defense Intelligence Agency and the CIA. In a telephone conversation with Bob Exler in 1989, he referred to recovered vehicles becoming available for research.
Do you anticipate that any of the recovered vehicles would ever become available for technological research outside of the military circles?
Again, I honestly don't know. 10 years ago, the answer would have been no.
Yeah.
Whether as time has evolved, they're beginning to become more open on it, is a possibility.
It seems like you're suggesting here that you're aware of retrieved UFOs being studied by the military.
No, the answer was no. I would not. We're not. Absolutely, we're no retrieved UFOs. I have high confidence that was not the case. Hardware that ended up out of Site 51 was our own planned collection platforms that we didn't want Soviets to know about. Happily, U-2 came along. We no longer needed to depend on balloons, high altitude, being floated by the jet stream to collect critical information we needed. What we didn't realize at that stage, that whether the U-2 flew at over 70,000 feet altitude, it still could be brought down by long-range surface-to-air missile, as Gary Francis Powers painfully discovered on his flight from Pakistan to Norway. So my speculation was simply everything. Not that there were people already done, but what in the future? That's why remember 89 is when I
Now the question is, who here is a body language expert? I'm not. But did you guys see, look, I let Bobby Raymond keep talking for a little bit because I was just so fascinated by his body language. As soon as Jay, and thank you Jay for Project Unity for doing that interview. It was, I saw the whole thing, it was pretty awkward. It was obviously Bobby Raymond like being super skeptical, anti-UFO, and then he gets busted, and as soon as he does that, he smiles. And then he starts doing this with his arms and like, come on, man, it's obvious you're lying, right? So that was fascinating. And where did we start? We started in 1988, before Bob Lazar, before Bob Exler, and this is, so John Lear, I'm very skeptical of most of what he said, but when you look at him back in the 80s, there was a lot of stuff he said that was crazy, but then there's some important things that he said. And that's sometimes disinformation 101. You know, you put some stuff that's nuts that nobody's gonna believe, but you put real information in there. And I guarantee that stuff about those names he mentioned, they're legit, they check out. And it's fascinating that it's 1988 when they were talking about this. Now, we can't forget about Bob Weschler, guys. We have to include that, and because this guy is a hero in my book, and is underappreciated. And you know what happened to him after that, right? After he did this? Things didn't go too well for him. So, yeah, let's see. I'm going to show you a clip of him. I'm also going to show you a clip of the phone call he got after he did that interview, or before he did that. I'm not sure, but he got a phone call. And that's when his life got pretty much screwed after that, so.
23 minutes past 7, a very good morning to you. UFOs, what we're talking about this morning. The gentleman with me now is Bob Exler. Bob is a former NASA mission specialist. Bob, we're going to see some footage very shortly with sightings, what are allegedly UFOs. But from your point of view, what is the single most convincing piece of evidence that you've come across that convinces you that we have been visited?
Well, I started out extremely skeptical about this whole thing. I thought this was just rubbish from the tabloids, but I was surprised to find thousands of U.S. government documents from intelligence agencies that tended to indicate that there was a little bit more to this than met the eye. So I went to seek guidance from the various highest levels of the United States intelligence community, and I was quite alarmed at what I was able to learn.
Now, we are, in this report that we're now going to show, we're going to hear a conversation featuring you. Tell me the context of that conversation.
Well, I had contacted Admiral Bobby Ray Inman, who was the head of the National Security Agency in the United States, Deputy Director at CIA, Director of Naval Intelligence, and a variety of intelligence posts, a technologist, and clearly someone that, if this was really accurate, that there really were UFOs and non-human intelligence around, this is a man who had to know. Mm-hmm. So I was able to contact him thanks to a contact through Admiral Lord Hill Norton here in the UK. And this conversation, he alarmingly not only indicated that these issues were covered under national secrecy laws, but that the United States government did in fact have possession of the hardware associated with this. In other words, this was an actual physical phenomenon. As
a craft, a spaceship.
Several of them, and they were in operational condition, which I assume suggested that they had been in contact, that they had been given these craft for some reason or another, because they certainly weren't crashed vehicles.
Okay. Well, is there anyone out there?
Bob Exler received this call.
Mr. Exler, this is Tom King in Admiral Inman's office. Yes, you would be breaching confidence and/or violation of the secrecy laws in discussing his involvement in any matter.
So who agrees with me? Bobby Ray Inman? Check. Edward Teller, to me, it's a no-brainer. To me, it's so obvious because I know the Bob Lazar story is very controversial, but it's a fact that everybody knows Edward Teller did hire Bob Lazar. They even asked him about it. He got super weird about it and uncomfortable. I think he refused to answer the question. But that's who you would have in charge. You would have people like Oppenheimer, Edward Teller, people, the best minds. That's who you would have to deal with such a complicated issue if all this was true, which I believe it is. So, respect to Bob Exler, Bobby Ray Inman, check. Now, there's another name I haven't done research on, but I don't know. Like, what I found about Dr. Kissinger was a lot of deep state stuff, but we're pretty sure he knows about UFOs. And but let me go on a little tangent about the deep state real quick, just real quick. This is a great channel. I think it's Johnny Harris. I mean, this might have music on it. I hope I don't get a copyright, but then again, I have 177 subscribers, so it's not going to be the end of the world, but it's a great channel. You guys should check it out. Let me show you what I found on the deep state. I don't even remember if this show kind of mentions Kissinger. I'm sure it does, but it's so interesting. Let me just give you a preview and ask you a question.
Joe Neal, David Phillips, CIA coup in Congo, early 1960s, CIA coup in Chile, 1973.
Las Vegas.
Starfish.
The assassination operation against General Schneider in 1970 is coordinated with Kissinger's office.
Thank you. Nice to see you all.
Mind control experiments, MK Ultra.
In 1950, the CIA launches a massive program to develop means of controlling people's minds. Some 40 U.S. academic institutions were involved in this kind of
LSD
research.
to people without their permission.
And we develop a truth serum, dosing somebody with LSD 60 times in a week. NSA's Operation Shamrock, electronic surveillance, 1945 to 1975. The first warrantless wiretapping.
Oh God, Bay of Pigs, nightmare.
There were hundreds of CIA assassination plots.
Operation Phoenix.
Eventually, Bill Colby, who was later director, admitted that they had killed 20,000 people.
Operation Mockingbird,
COINTELPRO,
Operation Chaos, Watergate, Jim Critchfield, Frank Wiesner, James Angleton, Truman Roosevelt, John Foster Dulles,
CIA coup in Indonesia, CIA coup in Greece, CIA involvement in the Guatemalan Civil War. It was a CIA crime spree for 20 years. There's no other way to describe it.
So by the 1970s, the CIA is this powerful, well-funded machine of intelligence that is doing a lot of secret things all around the world. They start blackmailing lawmakers to scare them away from investigating them and reining them in.
These agencies had harmful personal information on lots of people. When I was doing my Angleton book, a guy told me one day when he went to meet Angleton, Angleton quoted back to him what he had said to his wife in bed the night before. And so they had this capacity, and people knew that they had this capacity. You know, the Kennedys knew that J. Edgar Hoover had information about his affairs with various women.
Happy birthday, Mr. President.
This kind of knowledge that they had, Angleton and Hoover were masters at using those kind of secrets as leverage. Kennedy had this thing hanging over his head, and he knew Hoover, had that on him. And so, he couldn't fire Hoover.
And so much of this power is concentrated among just a few people, many of them not elected, and many of them living right here along these streets in this neighborhood of Georgetown, living in fancy homes, having fancy cocktail parties, and kind of running the Western world. It's exactly the nightmare of the founders of the country and the nightmare of President Truman.
And 1 month after the assassination of President Kennedy, Harry Truman publishes an article in the Washington Post and says the CIA should be abolished.
Wow.
And he says it has cast a shadow on the historical reputation of the United States.
That didn't happen to do much with UFOs, and at least not directly, but I think it's very important to understand what's going on here and who's in control of the cover-up. It's these people. And what he said there at the end is so fascinating because that's exactly what's going on today, guys. You don't think people from Congress are being intimidated? Guarantee it. They're terrified of these intel people. And Harry Truman, I made a mistake. And then Eisenhower, which is so fascinating because Eisenhower was the one who put the real executive order in 1954, rumors go, about this topic. And you know the lore. I'm not going to get into the lore. I don't know how deep that goes, but there was an executive classified order. And now you don't even get access to certain information unless, you got to be like some vice president or president, and afterwards you get to come into the World Economic Forum, Bilderberg, whatever, and then you're in, right? But so unelected bureaucrats, top people in the military-industrial complex. Now, I don't want to talk too much on this, but I'm very curious about this National Security Act because I do know that there was the Cold War that was getting pretty heated, but the Soviets didn't have the atomic bomb until 1949, and I don't know how much intel they had on that. I know there was people warning them hey, they're going to put all their resources into some sort of Manhattan Project, but if Harry Truman was so against this, why did he do it right after Roswell? And this clip that I show you ends with J. Edgar Hoover, that he couldn't fire John F. Kennedy, or John F. Kennedy couldn't fire him because he knew he was messing around with Marilyn Monroe. So anybody who's an elected official who wants transparency, if you have a wife, you have a family, please guys, like, be smart. Like, understand that anything you're gonna be watched, and you're gonna use any dirt you have against you. So yeah, that's important. That's important to know, and I think most people do know that, but who knows? Anyway, so let's go back to what we're talking about. And he mentioned J. Edgar Hoover. I think he was director of the FBI, but I did find something interesting. There's a document in the FBI about him complaining about not getting access to the UFOs in 1947. I'm pretty sure he might have gotten more access after that, but at this point he was pissed. Let me show you.
Back to, you mentioned that Guy Hoddle's FBI memo. There's another FBI memo that was extremely popular on the FBI's website. I featured it in Out of the Blue, and honestly, I don't know if it's still floating around on the FBI site. It probably is, I would imagine. But it's in, is it Eisenhower's own handwriting? No. J. Edgar Hoover. J. Edgar Hoover writes, and there's multiple interpretations of this, because it looks like S.A. Or it could be like a W that wasn't written quite right. They're just not quite sure. But it says,
former director of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, was also denied access, as he stated in his own handwriting in July of 1947. We must insist upon full access to disks recovered. Hoover continued, the Army grabbed it and wouldn't let the Bureau have it for cursory examination.
And it's in J. Edgar Hoover's own handwriting. That's on this document. And it says, as in, take the SA or SW, could be Southwest, and don't know. Case, it was a crash disk. The Army grabbed it and wouldn't let us have it for cursory examination. And it was written like 5 days or 6 days or a week after Roswell. So that was, did you ever see that?
Wow, no.
It's in other
nukes trying to blow. And yeah, so it's just an example, right? And he was like kind of the shadow Kissinger for most of those decades. Like, he was the guy that got stuff done. He had back channels with the Soviets. Do you think Kissinger knew about the UFO thing? Because Kissinger was 100%, very involved in atomic projects. Because he was in charge of the Covert Action Committee, or like the 303 committee. He definitely probably knew. Whether he was in charge of it, I think the structure of this, I don't really understand. But I think there was awareness of these programs, right? This kind of peripheral knowledge, right? It's like, if you're going to come close to it, like if you're going to be in if you're going to be just in the immediate periphery of it, you need to know it exists. You need to know not to go in, and know like where to avoid and where to throw other people off. So there's like, it's kind of there's a boundary layer, right? They need to establish around those activities. I was reading this book called UFO Crash by this UFO researcher William Steinman about the Aztec crash in 1948. Talks about this head of special projects at Wright-Patterson who came over with Operation Paperclip. His name is Eric Henry Wing. Steinman says, this is the guy who, like, I can't get anything on. The door shuts in my face every time I inquire about him. He and his boss, H.A.K., and then he just goes on or whatever. And I was just thinking, who is H.A.K.? And I was like, oh, Henry A. Kissinger. And then you look up his kind of career history, and he was very embedded in the atomic projects. And so, and I, Harold worked, they were like twin people throughout most of those administrations, where, Harold was, self-consciously not a self-promoter. He was not someone who was looking for the power. He was recognized, and his survivability was because he was going to be the guy working behind the scenes, executing, not taking credit, just the guy who would get stuff done, right? And that's what's, whereas Kissinger was the guy who would, like, walk over people's necks, right? But they were in equal positions, right? They were trusted, and they were often used by presidents, to check each other. Like, Malgren was used explicitly by Nixon to check Kissinger in many negotiations, to like confirm that Kissinger wasn't going rogue on various things. And the whole China thing, the back channels with the Soviets, Malgren was Nixon's like, confirmation, route, right? Because he didn't fully trust Kissinger to do all this stuff, because Kissinger was kind of this rogue guy, right? He thought he was the president, right? So Malgren was there to kind of like act as a bit of a check. That's amazing. And so Malgren was trusted by multiple presidents over many decades, and he is now coming out and saying NHI are real. We have their stuff. I don't know, guys. Like,
but that's a good example, right? Because he's former CIA, and like you have a lot of guys who are former CIA. It seems like there is some implicit imperative in one branch of the CIA that is pro some form of.
Malgren was never CIA.
Oh, he's never CIA.
No,
okay.
he was a PhD economist.
Okay.
Who came into the Defense Department, but then actually did mostly like trade and economic stuff for the latter half of his career. But he was fully cleared into the Q stuff. He was cleared into SSCI. But your point is but he met with the CIA obviously with Richard Bissell. He met with Lawrence Geist and DOE. But he was more of a higher level political guy.
Interesting. Okay, good to know. It feels like there is, like to your earlier point, there's a part of CIA that is pro.
Interesting indeed. So, one more thing I forgot to ask Ed earlier about Bob Eichler. Like he said, a lot of these craft are intact. That he thinks there might be some sort of contact going on. Like the Phoenix, Arizona, 1953 Kingman, that was landed. We've heard stories like that. David Rush said that. But I found that about J. Edgar Hoover and wanted to share it. Now let's see if I can find anything else on Kissinger, but I also want to touch on something that seems very important and I don't understand. I want to understand. So in 1962, there's this nuclear test, and it was called Operation Starfish Prime, I believe. And apparently, Tom DeLonge and Harald, I'm sorry, I apologize. I'll show you his full name in a minute. But he basically was this bureaucrat that worked, advised the Nixon administration, the JFK administration, and he was a very interesting guy. And all he posts now is on X mostly is about UFO. And he did give that breadcrumb about 1962 and how he went to those. I'll let Matthew Pines talk about this. And then we'll listen a little bit to Tom DeLonge as well.
I was someone very well that was also very senior in the intelligence community at the CIA and knew him very well. And she had a very unusual career. And she said that he had a very unusual career. And he finished his career. He was an operations officer, but he finished his career as a senior liaison between the CIA and Hollywood, right? So he was responsible for, helping ensure the CIA's story was told, but also helping ensure that certain stories were told in the right way, right, by Hollywood, right? And he actually left CIA to go to LA to be a screenwriter and scriptwriter consultant. And in his book, his main character, kind of super spy, who kind of traces the whole arc of the CIA and then has this sort of alien plot sort of woven in. One of the sort of side, duties of his main character is to intentionally manipulate and shape the cultural portrayal of Roswell and sort of the larger alien topic, to sort of shape public perceptions over many decades, right? And he's sort of winking. He's like, that was my job. And this is my character doing that in this particular sort of CIA, non-human intelligence plotline. Again, it's not like he's admitting anything, but it's like he's sort of winking at you, right? I found that quite suggestive. And of course, it maps to his actual career that I know was what he was doing. So,
and it has been so much information through media over the years that it's impossible to know what was actually sprinkled in there with truth, what wasn't. The more fantastical stuff, it's easy to identify, but at this point, we don't know really. It's and the stigma also persists so much. I wanted to ask you about another one of your contacts that, based on the interactions that I've seen from you two, I think that you may have a professional relationship, at least. I'm talking about Harald Malgren. He recently has been very active on X, and he's been talking about going to Los Alamos right after the Bluegill nuclear test. And he talked about President Kennedy being briefed on a specific object that fell right after the test. Is that a correct assessment?
Yeah, from my read of his public statements, that yes, essentially there was the Bluegill triple prime, and just sidebar, Jeff Cruikshank, I think, has done the most kind of historical deep dive research on that episode. He's still, I think, digging through archives, trying to piece together really kind of what happened with that test. And those series of tests were quite significant, kind of in the development of our anti-ballistic missile system. All right, and that was one of the main programs that Harald was tasked with leading, essentially the design, cost, build of our anti-ballistic missile systems. And so he was, regularly traveling to Los Alamos to kind of coordinate between the Department of Energy / Atomic Energy Commission and the Defense Department on that series of tests and that system, which was, a very expensive, very novel system, because it was relying on nuclear weapon, like nuclear missiles, to knock down other nuclear missiles, right? So it's trying to test out, right, what sorts of system designs and in terms of weapons platforms, and payloads would be most effective, right? And so I think that test involved essentially a nuclear device encased in gold to enhance, to a certain extent, kind of the electromagnetic and kind of plasma effect on an incoming ballistic missile warhead. And that apparently, like, another object fell out of the fireball, and it was retrieved by the Navy as part of that test down the ocean. And that a report of that UFO object retrieval was made its way to the White House, to him and Kennedy. And then when they request, I don't know how much information was in that report, but there was something that got to them of like something happened. And when they tried to follow up on it to get more information, it was denied. And so to get more information, Harold, had to physically kind of fly out to Los Alamos. And I don't know exactly what he found out, but then Kennedy, I think, came shortly after him. And that's now kind of, you can see the public record of Kennedy's visit to Los Alamos. And at that same time, I think it was 1963-ish, I think in a previous tweet, Harold had talked about how when he had been out there leading kind of the design meetings for this anti-ballistic missile system, he had met with Lawrence P. Geis, who was then the director of the Western Division of the Atomic Energy Commission, and previously was the director of the Military Applications Division, which is responsible for basically all the nuclear weapons kind of research and development and testing under the auspices of the AEC. So the whole network of labs out there from Sandia to Los Alamos, et cetera, kind of came under his remit. And when he had this conversation, I don't know when in the sequence of his time there, but I think it was 1963 is what he said, that he had met with Lawrence P. Geis, who told him of essentially their recovery of UAP objects, right? So if I just take those two things together that he stated, there's this test where, a object, something anomalous, came out of the fireball, and it wasn't the reentry vehicle of the thing that was just disintegrated. And then it was retrieved by the Navy, and then it was sufficiently important enough to notify him at the White House, who was leading this whole archipelago of testing, very expensive, R&D activities, one of the most top priority, most sensitive kind of military defense projects at the time. And Kennedy got notified, and then he goes out there. And at some point in those meetings or his time there, he has this, meeting with the guy in charge of that whole archipelago on the AEC side, who tells him, yeah, we've been recovering UFOs, basically, right? That seems quite significant of a historical kind of record. And so, I think, it would be really enlightening to hear Harold kind of elaborate on that. We'll see if that happens soon. But then, he'd also tweeted, I think, about how later, like a few years later, don't recall exactly when, maybe later in the 60s, could be early 70s, he had a similar meeting with another kind of, one of the guys on the top of that kind of pile, but a guy named Richard Bissell, who was kind of a legend in the early history of the CIA and was responsible for setting up Area 51, setting up the National Reconnaissance Office, top spook, basically doing all of the most covert operations for the intelligence community, essentially, like the number two guy. And Harold describes a meeting he had with him where he was given a private briefing, right, on their efforts to retrieve and reverse engineer, quote, like other world technologies was the term that Harold said Richard Bissell had used. And so those are, quite significant historical recollections. And yeah, they point back to a very, a period of American history, around the 60s in particular, where these activities apparently were quite intense and quite deeply connected to the most significant military defense and intelligence activities at the time.
Do you think that maybe because
if we take like some of the things we're working on, you're like, okay, so you're telling me there's a real nuclear test that happened. You're telling me we did it in space to see what the fuck would happen, that maybe a few people knew that something might go down if we do this. Literally, as like figuratively and literally, and that's a pretty scary thing. Like, that's a big fucking deal. That's a big deal that we're toying with nuclear weapons and we're going to go explode one in space to see what happens. And there's only a few guys on the hundreds of people working on this thing that are saying, oh, yeah, there's something else might happen if we do that, but we're not going to tell everybody, but we're going to sit there and we're going to hold our breath and piss our pants because we don't really know what we're doing. We're just playing with like extremely dangerous toys and machines up in the sky, So that kind of thing is like, okay, that changes everything. That little piece of information is such a big deal. There's like, what came down? What did we find out? Like, who knew about it? How does this change, who we are and how we operate, and what kinds of basements in Washington, D.C. are people shitting their pants saying, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? Do we tell people? Do we not tell people? And so like, if you were to make a story around that, then I'm like, I'm all ears. Like, then I'm like, okay, that's a life-changing little piece of information. And if you can wrap it within the kind of a world that I can relate to, because I was telling.
This is the thing. Finally got a tripod. Because mine broke early when I came here. And it's kind of a bad setup. I need to practice on that, guys. But what is up with the 1962 case that Tom DeLonge is talking about? And Matthew Pines and Harald, I can't believe I just did this again. The guy on X that everybody's talking about. I would edit this and do what I have to do, but I actually gotta go pick up my daughter really fast, so I'm sorry for leaving this raw. But a lot of guys will leave it in the comments. This guy is very active on X, and he knows a lot of stuff, okay? So what the hell happened in 1962? We know UFOs have crashed. We know that. But why is this case so important? And you know Tom DeLonge, he hears things. And now you have this guy saying this, and Matthew Pines, which knows a lot more too. I'm trying to understand. Tom DeLonge said they had people making decisions that are very important and that they're shitting their pants in Washington, D.C. Should I tell them? Should I not tell them? What's going on with that, guys? Because I know he wrote a book about it, and I still didn't get it. What was it about that case, guys? Also, lastly, I had a stranger reading a book there, this woman, and one of the things I like to do is go to strangers and ask them about the topic. I want to start doing that, but she's reading a book. Guys, if you ever want any good tips on how to make a move on women, just go to them while they're reading a book, or if they're in the gym, just tap their shoulder. Don't do that. Do not do that. No, I'm kidding. Don't do that. That's weird. But I did. Hey, I was like, hey, do you mind if I ask you a few questions? Like, it's for my YouTube channel. Like, you don't have to say yes. Like, I know you're reading a book. I'm sorry, but like, she said no, so I'm not gonna impose it on her, right? But yeah, I don't know, guys. That's all I have. So major points of this video was the second version of people, a few names in the control group or whatever. I know it's not called MJ12 anymore. One thing I forgot to add was Carl Sagan was on that list, or according to John Lear. And now I don't know if this is true, but he said he was making some extraordinary claims in 1962, even about the moon. In 1963, he apparently got hired, went into the MJ12. And what's interesting for me about that, it's a 2-hour lecture on Eyes on Cinema, I will link it down below, is Carl Sagan was always battling with J. Allen Hynek. And Carl Sagan seemed like open-minded and all that, but no, when it comes to this, no. And there's always seems to be some big astronomer that's against this, and it's a struggle for me, guys, because I'm not a conspiracy person. I'm really not. But with this UFO stuff, it's obviously a conspiracy, and just like JFK, those are the two OG conspiracies. One is very different than the other because one is ongoing, and it's affecting us and our military and generally people every day. The problem is it gets covered up, and the people that suffer through this collateral damage. So sad. And JFK was a president that died, and that was huge conspiracy, but it's not, it's a different issue because one's ongoing and one's a non-human intelligence. Apparently they're connected. I actually did ask Richard Dolan what he thought about that, and he brought it up in his last YouTube, not his last, 1 or 2 shows ago. He's like, somebody asked me about that, that was me. And yeah, but he didn't go into what I was asking him, because I was asking him about how different these are too, and he didn't go into them. But yeah, guys, that's all I got today. I hope I did a good job. Oh, wait, sorry. Did I say that J. Allen Hynek and Carl Sagan were always, yeah, I did say that. So these people are always in the background. Sean Kirkpatrick, what was he doing in a Brandon Fugel Skinwalker Ranch briefing? Can somebody answer me that? So, I don't know, man. These people are always there, guys. The good news is that a lot of people from the deep state, they're out. Mike Turner, for example, out. The puppets, right? And a lot of other people. But the thing is, I don't know if it's going to be enough for disclosure. there's something about this topic, and I mentioned that earlier, that is very uncomfortable with people. So, I don't know where to go with it. I'm like, did they get men in black? That's the crazy thing to think, I admit. Or is it the most likely rational explanation? It's just unpredictable consequences and terrifying, psychologically terrifying to some people. Shout out to Ivan, he's Luis Elizondo lawyer. He tweeted out, most people are psychologically terrified and run away from this topic, and I agree, 100%. So, all of you interested in UFOs and truth, you're badasses. You're badasses. Screw the stigma. Let's go. You know what I mean? Like, let's bring truth. Like, I see the thing is, that's my biggest core value, truth. To a fault. Too honest sometimes. Ay, adios.